everybody, I'm Bobby. Welcome back to the Working Man's Whiskey. The whiskey I'd like to review today is George Dickel number 8. And I wanted to come back to George Dickel because my first review I ever did on this channel was George Dickel number 12. And George Dickel, I feel, kind of gets lost behind Jack Daniels as far as the big Tennessee whiskeys go. And I think George Dickel should be recognized as great Tennessee whiskey. And I think among whiskey drinkers and bourbon drinkers, as far as American whiskeys go, anyway, I think George Dickel is fairly well recognized and respected. But they don't advertise as much as Jack Daniels does. They don't. They spend, in my opinion, more money on the quality of the product than they do, on commercials and just publicizing their brand. Which, I mean, that's not a knock on Jack. It's just I think it's a fact. I mean, George Dickel just you don't see commercials for their stuff, at least out my way. It's really good whiskey. To be honest with you, I mean, to each their own, and I respect anybody's opinion. But George Dickel is my choice for Tennessee whiskey. Jack is good, but there's just something about George Dickel. It's got a smoother, more mellow taste to me, and it's funny because George Dickel actually, in the early days, on their bottles they would have a saying that said "mellow as moonlight," and that was because they distilled their whiskey by the light of the moon, and also in cold winter months, because George Dickel felt that the colder weather made the filtration process give the whiskey a more mellow taste, just a smoother taste. So it's pretty historical stuff. George Dickel started. Well, he came to the U.S. from Germany back in 1818. In the mid 1840s. Sorry, he started working in the liquor business. Worked at a liquor store, and then started distilling whiskey. He opened the George Dickel distillery, George Dickel Company distillery, in 1870. And George, he ran the distillery for a number of years. I believe he had an accident in 1886, and his health was never the same after that. And he ended up dying in 1894. But his whiskey lives on. During Prohibition, his whiskey was sold and to another company. And after Prohibition, they started making the whiskey again. Didn't have the mash bill written down anywhere. It was kind of lost for a while until they talked to two old employees, George Dickel employees, who had remembered the mash bill. It wasn't written down, but they'd remembered it. So anyway, they were able to get back to making their product, and it's still going strong today. And I wanted to read you a little bit about George Dickel. On the bottle here, it's as you can see, it's a sour mash whiskey, and sour mash, as most of you guys know, means that after they've made a batch of whiskey, they'll take a little bit of the mash from that batch, and the grains and all that stuff, and they'll transfer it to the next I guess vat to be to be part of the mash bill of the next batch of whiskey, and they keep on going with that, and it just it gives it a unique flavor. It tends to give it a little bit of a sour flavor, sour mash. It's tends to give it a little bit of like a green apple tint to it. So anyway, it is a sour mash, as I said. This is the classic number 8 recipe. Some people think George Dickel number 8 or George Dickel number 12 is an age statement. It's not. It's not a 12-year-old whiskey or an 8-year-old whiskey. Classic number 8, which this one is, just means it's their number 8 recipe, and their number 12, which I reviewed here for my first review, is their number 12 recipe, which happens to be my favorite, favorite of George Dickel's products. Until you start getting into the single barrel and all that stuff. But anyway, this is George Dickel's classic number 8 recipe. They also have the number 1, which is kind of a white dog. It's the same mash that goes into the whiskey that makes up the whiskey. With the corn and the malted barley and the rye. George Dickel's whiskeys are all, except for the rye whiskey, they're all made up of over 80% corn. And anyway, the white dog, or the number 1 is kind of a white dog. It's a whiskey that is made up of the same mash bill as this one here, but it's unaged, so it never sees a barrel or anything, and has no barrel charge. It's a clear corn whiskey. So try that one out as well. And at some point, I'll be doing his George Dickel's rye whiskey, which they started in 2012, and it's really good stuff. Anyway, back to the number 8 here. I'll read you a little bit about it. There's a lot of information here on this bottle, so bear with me a little bit. It says it's a small batch, actually. This is a small batch whiskey, which means created from 100 barrels or less of whiskey. Instead of dumping hundreds or 1,000 barrels of whiskey all together and putting it in a bottle, putting it in several bottles. They make this one up of 100 barrels or less, so it's kind of a cool thing about this. So let's read this. It says, George A. Dickel. Back in 1870, George Dickel began fulfilling his dream of crafting the smoothest Tennessee whiskey around. George believed that to make the best whiskey, there was one ingredient that he needed most: time. While more than a century has passed since George distilled his first batch, we continue to honor George's timeless craftsmanship by letting our whiskey rest as long as it needs to before bottling. Inspired early on, George discovered that his whiskey made in the cold winter months tasted smoother. Today we follow this tradition by chilling our whiskey before filtering it through sugar maple charcoal. We think our unique chilled filtration process makes a fine whiskey. Hope you agree. Then it says Cascade Hollow. Take a sip of George Dickel's fine whiskey, and you'll know it comes from someplace pretty special. It's called Cascade Hollow. Back in the 1800s, there were 2 things that drew George here: friendly people and the fresh water of Cascade Springs. Some of the finest spring water we reckon to be found anywhere. If you come to Cascade Hollow for a visit, you'll find that not much has changed in the last century or so, on either count. And the last thing I'll read you about this, and this is about number 8 directly, George Dickel number 8. It says, our classic number 8 is aged to perfection in charred white oak cask, or barrels, same thing, creating our signature balance of flavors, featuring aromas of aged oak and caramel, leading to a smoky finish with hints of maple and buttered corn. Around here, we like to say, there ain't nothing better. So anyway, that's George Dickel. Let's pop it open, try it out. A bit more. Right. And by the way, guys, this is back to the age statement. There is no age statement on George Dickel products. In the company, they have tasters, and they taste the whiskeys as they age and determine when they're ready by taste, not by any kind of time limit or anything like that. So anyway, take a look at this. It's kind of a gold, light to medium amber color. So you can see that This has probably been in the barrel. I would guess, if I had to take a guess, probably 5 or 6 years. So anyway, take a take a smell or take a sniff. And on the nose, with number 8, you get maple, sweet corn. Um, you definitely get a woodiness about it. Um, just this whiskey, the wood in the whiskey is very prominent, and it's also got kind of an herbal thing going on. But the funny thing is, and it says in the bottle, it says buttered corn. It has a buttered corn character about it. Before I even read this bottle, the first time I ever drank George Dickel number 8, one of the first things I did smell was it smelled like buttered popcorn in there, and that's still smell it. It's a very unique nose or scent on the nose. I've never actually smelled a whiskey that's had that before. So anyway, let's take a sip. And on the palate, guys, you definitely get that sweet corn, toffee notes, a little bit of maple, but it's not too sweet. Even though you do taste those things, it's not an overly sweet product. There are a lot of whiskeys out there that I think try to cover up the harshness a little bit with more sweetness. But this one, it's got a great balance. You definitely taste the maple because it's filtered over the sugar maple charcoal, and in that process, they grind the charcoal up, the sugar maple charcoal, into like a pea gravel form, and put the stuff in the vat, and then pour the whiskey over it, and it trickles all the way down through the sugar maple charcoal, and just gives it a nice flavor while it's aging in the barrel. So anyway, you taste the maple, and all that, all the sweet stuff, but it's balanced nicely by wood, by herbal notes. You get rye in there, a little bit of maybe cinnamon spice. Guys, it's just a really nice balanced whiskey. If you like those woody notes like I do, from the oak barrel, you're definitely going to like this one, because it's got a lot of it in there. It's got a lot of it in there. So anyway, George Dickel, and this, by the way, this whiskey is this was $15. Usually you find this bottle for around 18, but I got it for like $14 before tax, which is amazing. I mean, this is a killer whiskey for sub $20. It's hard to beat. So, if you find this, number 8, number 12, I'll be honest, I haven't had the number 1 yet, but I'd like to give that a shot as well. So if you find any of those, or the rye, which is a very good one that we'll get to at some point, definitely give it a shot. I think you're going to be impressed. This is really good Tennessee whiskey. It's smooth, and just can't go wrong with it. So until next time, cheers.